but we will start off with our flatbread. And hopefully everyone who's coming on is now on and watching. So I'll just say morning again for those of you that have just joined in. We're making sticky chicken kebabs, or alternative if you're not using chicken, and we're going to be making an easy peasy recipe for flatbreads, and I mean it's dead easy. Most people have got flour in the cupboard. Most people have got flour in the cupboard. It's a bit more readily available now in the supermarkets and things, and yoghurt as well. Now I put on the post that we would be using natural yoghurt, but if you've got Greek yoghurt or you have a non-dairy alternative like soya yoghurt, anything like that is absolutely fine. So, same principle as when we've made any dough products before. I always use my table knife just to combine the ingredients, and I gradually add my yoghurt into my flour. So we shouldn't get hands that are too sticky, and some yoghurt textures are slightly thinner than others, so although it says 175 grams of yoghurt, you might find you don't need all of it, so I would just kind of spoon it in as you go. So we don't need to put anything on yet to heat up ovens, grills or anything. It's only the grill we're using, and we'll come back to that just before we're ready to cook them. If you're saving these for dinner tonight, then great, just put them in the fridge, or if you're going to whack them on the barbecue, obviously that's all good as well. Just a quick note actually, depending on what types of skewers you're using, if you've got metal ones, fine, we can go ahead and put the food straight on those. If you're using the wooden like bamboo style ones, soak them in a tray sink full of cold water, and just soaking them in the water will prevent them from burning. If you didn't know that. So if you're using the bamboo wooden style ones, soak them in some water. You can lay them in water now, get them soaking. And if you're using the metal ones, then they're good to go. So flatbreads, mega easy to make, great for children to make, and we're only using 3 ingredients: baking powder, self-raising flour and yoghurt. And the general rule is, however much flour you use the same quantity of yoghurt in it as well, but bearing in mind just adding it bit by bit, because the consistencies of yoghurt do vary. So I've got my self-raising flour and baking powder in my bowl, and I'm going to start off by adding 3 spoonfuls of my yoghurt. So this is measured out in here, this is 175 grams, and I've just got a dessert spoon here, and I'm just literally putting 3 spoonfuls in there. Start off less, and then you can gradually add. Use your table knife and just mix it round to bring it together. If you want to do garlic flatbreads, if you've got like a squeezy tube of garlic paste, or you've got some crushed garlic already, you can whack a bit of that in there. If you wanted to spice them up, you could put some chilli, dried chilli in there. If you wanted to do like tomato style flatbreads, you could squeeze a bit of tomato puree in there. You obviously need slightly less yoghurt if you do that. So it's starting to come together with my 3 spoonfuls, but not enough yet, so I'm going to add another 1, 2 into there, and just mix it in. There's going to come a point when we need to get our hands in here. I would just use one hand and then bring it together to form a ball of dough. And that is how simple the flatbread recipe is. It's a winner. So Greek yoghurt, natural yoghurt, soya yoghurt, anything like that will work, and just gradually add it. Now I'm going to use my hand now to bring it together into a ball of dough. If it's not sticking easily and it feels quite dry, then just keep going with the yoghurt until you get to the consistency where it's not too sticky, but it's not really dry and flaky. So that's quite dry and flaky at the moment, so I'll just add a bit more yoghurt into it. Okay, and as I bring that round, it's sticking nicely in a ball of dough. Fab. Okay, one ball of dough. If you've got any questions about that, just give me a shout, and hopefully I don't miss too many of the questions coming in. Okay, so with our bread, like any bread, we need to let it rest just for a little while. Now there's a small amount of gluten in our soft flour, which is self-raising or plain flour, and it's a good thing just to let it rest now, so it's not quite so tough when we go to cook it. So I'm just going to put it to one side, put a tea towel, bit of cling film over the top, then we can start our marinade. If yours feels slightly too sticky and you're now a bit worried that you've added too much, don't worry, because we will sprinkle some flour down on the table before we roll it out. So pop your bread, I'm just going to put mine to one side, lay a clean tea towel over it, and then we'll come back to it. I'm just going to go and wash my hands, then we'll be back and we will start on the marinade. So if you're not going to be making the kebabs, you can disappear for 10 minutes if you don't want to watch it all, and then come back on and we'll go through the flatbreads. But letting the dough rest is really important because you'll get a much better texture, otherwise they'll be quite dense and quite chewy. Okay, so let it relax and we'll start on the kebabs. I'm just going to wash my hands. Okay, so next is our marinade. So we've got a whole heap of ingredients that are going to go into our marinade, and I've just got a little whisk just to combine them all. Now, marinades are really good for meat because they help obviously to add flavour and they help to tenderise the meat as well. So they just help to break down the fibres of the meat so that it's more acceptable to eat, so it's not as chewy. So meats like lamb and beef are really good for marinating because obviously they're that much tougher. With chicken, it doesn't take a lot of tenderising, but it really packs in the flavour, which is what we want. So for measuring our ingredients, we're using tablespoons or teaspoons. If you want to measure out your oil and vinegar in a measuring jug, you can do, but if you've got a tablespoon, they're 15 millilitres. So obviously you can just double up on those. I know a few of you said, I don't own a tablespoon. Doesn't matter, you can use a teaspoon, which is 5 mil. So obviously 3 of those is 1 tablespoon. So if you want to do it that way, you can do as well. So we'll start off by measuring out our oil, which is 50 millilitres of oil, which we'll put into the bowl. So just measure that out. If you haven't got olive oil, you can use veg oil, that's fine. I just prefer the flavour. It's a bit richer with olive oil. So that's my olive oil in there. Next, I'm going to add my red wine vinegar. If you haven't got red wine vinegar, then you could use white wine vinegar. You could use sherry vinegar, or you could use, if you didn't have any of those, you could use malt vinegar. That just has quite a distinct flavour to it. And you could always add a bit of malt vinegar and a little splash of red wine as well, which I'm sure everybody's got a bit of red wine lurking around. So 35 millilitres of your vinegar of choice into your dish, bowl, and you'll see this is a good one for the children. Obviously oil and vinegar don't mix, so we need something called an emulsifier to bring it together. So if we were making a dressing, which is basically, this is the way that we'd make French dressing, you could add like a half a teaspoon of mustard into it, and then that would help to emulsify, help to bring the ingredients together. A little bit of science in there as well, can't help myself. Okay, so thyme. If you had fresh thyme, brilliant. I couldn't actually get hold of any fresh thyme, and I don't have it growing in my garden. I've got some dried thyme, so I'm just going to add half a teaspoon of dried thyme into it. You can use, thyme's nice and sweet, which is why we're using it in the sticky chicken. Basil's also good, so if you've got some dried or fresh basil, you can just shred the fresh basil into it. Oregano, that's another nice sweet herb as well. So I'm just sticking with what I've said, and that's thyme. So next we've got paprika. So paprika has a really nice smoky flavour, so when we're using honey and when we're using vinegar, it helps to balance those out, and that's what we need for our sticky chicken. So 3 teaspoons, don't heap them, just level teaspoons. And obviously paprika isn't spicy unless you buy the spiced one. Cayenne pepper works in a similar way to paprika, but just is spicier. So if you wanted to add a bit of heat as well, you could do some paprika and some cayenne. Okay, so that's my 3 teaspoons in there. If you've got garlic, it's roughly equivalent to 2 cloves of garlic or 2 kind of level teaspoons. I always keep a tube of squeezy garlic in my fridge. It's going to sound really silly, but when you prep garlic, and when I'm at school and I'm teaching, we're working with garlic all the time, and my hands constantly stink of garlic. I love it, but just not constant. So I always keep a squeezy tube of garlic in my fridge as well, just so that I'm not handling garlic all the time. Okay, 1.5 tablespoons of honey. We'll put that into our marinade as well. Now, if you just add honey to meat and then you go to barbecue, you will have probably noticed that it burns quite quickly. You get that charred effect on the outside. Because we've got vinegar going in there and we've got oil, it will reduce the kind of blackness happening on the meat. And add another one. So 1.5, so I haven't quite done a full second one. Honey, and obviously that's going to add to the sticky texture. Just use my whisk to scrape that off. So we've got oil, vinegar, herbs in there, garlic, honey, and we'll just add a little bit of seasoning as well. And this is great because you can obviously scale up or reduce it depending on how much you are doing. So I've chopped 2 chicken breasts today, so I'll probably get maybe 3 or 4 kebabs out of it once we've got peppers on there as well. So if you were doing a larger batch, just double, triple it up. Good bit of maths to do that as well. I know I rattle on about it all the time, but when we're cooking at school, I say to the pupils, you're doing so much more than just working with food. There's so many other things that we're considering. Last week, making the carrot scones was a prime example of that, because we had history going on, we had obviously maths with all the measurements, we had the science looking at the reaction of why the scone rises. It makes me happy. Okay, marinade will look like that. And you should have your chicken already prepped. I did put on the list if you could dice it before. So I've got my bowl of chicken here and it's diced up, so I'm literally just going to add that into there, and then we'll just let it macerate so it soaks up some of the marinade and obviously takes on all the flavours as well. In an ideal world, you could do this the night before, put it in the fridge, and then when you want to build your kebabs the next day and ready to cook, they will really have taken on the flavour, which is good. Just make it more intense. Okay, so just give that, make sure all the chicken is coated in it. And then we'll talk about what else is going to go on to the kebabs. Now, if you're not using chicken, and you are using an alternative, somebody commented and said that they're pescatarian, so I suggested like a chunky fish, something like monkfish is a really nice meaty fish to put on there that would hold well on a kebab. You could use salmon as well, you just need to make sure that the pieces are cut fairly large, otherwise they would flake off the skewer. You could use just a whole range of vegetables on there and marinate them. You could use halloumi cheese. and again you can marinate that as well, so you can swap. So the basic kind of sticky chicken marinade is there, and then what you use as your kind of key ingredient is up to you. So I've got my chicken, it's in there. I'm just going to pop that to one side for the moment. Ideally we'll put that into the fridge to keep it nice and cold, and obviously from a hygiene point of view, when you're working with chicken, make sure you've washed your hands. We don't want any cross-contamination going on. So that's my chicken bowl. Just going to put that out of the way. A wash, and then we're good to go. So other ingredients. These are great for barbecues because when you cook on a barbecue, it obviously adds that nice charred flavour, which is just lovely. And when we're using ingredients like paprika, and we're having that nice smoky flavour, the flavours that you naturally get from barbecue, particularly on coal ones, or if you've got oak chippings and things on there, it would really add to the smokiness. So when we're building our kebabs, I've got some chorizo sausage. So when you buy the chorizo sausage, it obviously has a fine skin on it. Some people forget to take that off, and when you slice it and cook it with the skin on, it is edible, but it's really tough. So just make sure you peel that outer layer off, and then I've cut them into roughly centimetre thick pieces, but if you really like it and you want it chunkier, then cut it chunkier. If they're too thin, they'll just break when they go on the skewer. I've got some peppers, so I used small peppers, baby ones. They're really nice and sweet, and I've just got a whole range of colours going on there, cut into nice chunky pieces to thread onto the kebabs. And then obviously I've got my chicken going on as well. Again, you could pack other vegetables on there. You could use aubergine, you could use courgette, cut into nice big rounds. And if you marinated them, they take on the flavour because they're quite bland without anything on. So they'd be a really good veg to use on there as well. So I've got my ingredients ready for that. My chicken's marinating for a minute, and we will talk about flatbreads. Before I do, I want to say good morning to Felix, because I know Felix has been, he's my friend's son, and he's been cooking right from the first one that I did 5 weeks ago, I think, and today he's wearing his nice new apron as well, because he's turned into a real chef now. So Felix is 8 and he's doing a great job. So morning, Felix. Right, flatbreads. We've let it rest. There'd be no harm in making this and leaving it to rest for half an hour. Just make sure you cover it though when you do, so that it doesn't form a crust. And then we're going to take a little bit of extra flour, which is why I said to make sure you've got some extra flour, and just dust that onto the table. And we will use a rolling pin as well. Now what you could do, if you're preparing this and you've got other things going on as well, there's no harm in rolling out the flatbreads in advance and just laying them on some greaseproof paper and covering them. And then you can cook them when they're ready. Flatbreads could be cooked on the barbecue. You just brush them with a little bit of melted butter before you put them on there. We're going to do them in the frying pan today with a little bit of butter and a small amount of oil in the pan. So divide your dough into 4. And we'll just work with one piece at a time. Now it might feel slightly sticky, that's just where it's relaxed and we've just let it rest for a few minutes. Just coat it in that flour, and unlike bread dough, we don't need to knead it for 10 minutes, but we do just need to just work it for, I don't know, half a minute to a minute. And if you feel like you need a little bit more flour, just sprinkle a little bit down. Not too much, because we don't want to dry it out. If they're too dry, they'll be really chewy and become quite dense. Okay, so principle when we're rolling out, we do this in the same way that you do for rolling pastry. 2 rolls, 1/4 turn, 2 rolls, 1/4 turn. Just keep going around like that. That way it's not going to stick to the table and it's not going to stick to your rolling pin. slide the rolling pin just in a little bit of the flour if it feels like it's getting a little bit what we call tacky, slightly sticky. Just keep going. And if you just wanted to do all the prep now and not cook anything, that's absolutely fine as well. These will keep, like I said, just covered. So mine's just sticking a little bit, so I'm going to sprinkle just a tad more flour down. Yeah, you could roll them out, leave them covered and cook them when you want them. I'll cook one this morning to show you, and we'll cook the kebabs as well, just so that I take you through the whole process. There we go. So keep going. Depending on how thick or thin you want your flatbreads, I would keep going until you're looking at probably just over half the width of my rolling pin, which is about 35 centimetres long. But they're really quick to cook. So if you wanted to make them slightly bigger, just keep going. Just have to be quite gentle with them because they are quite delicate. At the end of the day, all we've got is flour and yoghurt in there. Because we've got baking powder and because we've used self-raising flour, when we cook them they will puff up slightly, but that just helps to add to the light and texture as well. Now because they're quite pliable, you can go around and just, if you want to be really fussy with the shape, you could go around and just form that into a nice neat circle as well. And just make sure once you finish rolling it out that there is enough flour underneath it, because for any length of time that we leave something on the workbench, it will stick to it. So just make sure there's a bit of flour underneath. And that's one rolled out. So if you want to roll them all out now and put them on some greaseproof paper, then you can do. If you just want to have a go at rolling out one, and then if you've got any questions, if it's not working, you can ask me. And I'll just make sure that's kept in the flour. Okay, I'm just going to wash my hands and I'm going to cook this flatbread so you can see what it's like. Okay, so with our pan, we want to heat it up. So I'm just going to do a really small amount of butter in there, probably not even half a teaspoon amount of butter, and just a tiny splash of olive oil as well. What we don't want is too much in there that they're really greasy, but we need enough so that it adds flavour to the flatbread but also doesn't allow it to stick. So I'm going to put my pan on to heat up. Never fry in a cold pan, because as soon as you put something in there it will want to stick, and particularly if you're using butter or oil and then you add ingredients into cold butter or oil, they're just like a sponge, so they soak up the fat and then they hold in the grease. So always make sure, it doesn't matter what you're doing, that you heat up the oil first. And just a little test, just hold your hand just above, does it feel quite hot? If it does, then you're ready to go. So pan's going on, and I just have to say, this is, I don't know if you have a favourite pan, I'm probably just the only sad person that does, but this is my favourite frying pan. No one else is allowed to use it in the house apart from me, and I bought it in Aldi. When you do shopping, bag of sugar, frying pan, as you do, but I just love it, so this is my special pan. And yes, I need to get out more. Okay, pan goes onto the heat, and you want a medium flame. So you don't want it too fierce, where it will colour the dough too quickly, but it needs to be hot enough that we're going to create that seal when we put the bread in. So I'm going to just do a little splash of olive oil So about half a teaspoon and a little bit of butter. Now when we're frying with butter, butter can turn brown quite quickly. And we obviously don't want that for our flatbreads. So when we add oil to it, it just stops that butter from browning so quickly. So I'm going to add my little bit of butter as well. You could melt the butter and then brush the butter on afterwards. So you could just use a little bit of oil and then brush melted butter on once the flatbreads are cooked as well. That's up to you. So flatbread's good, it's not stuck to the table. I'm going to heat the pan until the butter has melted and just starts to foam slightly. And you'll know then that your pan is hot enough. While you're waiting for that, if you are going to be grilling your kebabs, I've just got my grill tray, I've put a little bit of foil underneath, hopefully so that it doesn't all burn to the bottom of the tray, because we're using honey. It can be a bit of a pain to clean, so I've got my grill tray ready for when we put our kebabs together. So I don't know if you can see, but I've melted the butter and it's just foaming slightly. Almost starts to crackle. At that point, we're going to be ready to add our flatbread into it. There we go. I could have actually left that another few seconds as well. So while that's in, you can be doing the process for the next one. So again, a little bit of flour down and roll it out, and just make sure you do those 2 rolls and then quarter turn, and that way it's not going to stick to your table and it's not going to stick to your rolling pin either. So I'm just going to cook one for the moment, and I will come back and do mine afterwards. So I'm going to put these back into my bowl and just cover them up. Good morning, Joe. Joe's a fellow food teacher, great food scientist as well. He's on watching this morning. Sticky chicken, it's going nicely. If you need to wipe down, you can do. If your bench is okay, we're going to move on in a moment and start the kebabs. Now, flatbreads will take about 3 to 4 minutes to cook. They're really quick to get cooking, and you can see already, just whip this off the heat, it's puffing up nicely, so it's nice and bubbly. If you're feeling quite brave, roll yours out even a little bit thinner than I've done. So what we're looking for is a nice even golden brown colour. Heat control on this is really important, so don't have the flame too high, because they will colour too quickly but still be too doughy. Equally, you don't want it too low, because the longer that's sitting in a cooler pan, the more chance you've got of it sticking. So it's getting a nice light golden brown colour to it, and in a moment I'm going to flip it over. Once I've done that and my flatbread is cooked, we will then skewer our chicken kebabs and get those on cooking. So if you're going to cook yours now, put your grill on and heat it. So I would put the grill up to full so it gets nice and hot, and then we can drop the temperature down just a little bit when we go to put them in to cook. So I've got an electric grill, so I'm going to turn mine on to full heat, and I'm going to start that now because it takes a little while to heat up. So naan bread, not naan bread, same principle for cooking naan bread, flatbread. Flip it over and you can see it's got a nice even golden brown colour. And then it's just repeating the process. So if you've made 4, do the same with all 4. They will keep as well for later on, and you can warm them back up. If you're doing a barbie later and you're going to put your kebabs on, you can cook your flatbreads in advance and then just chuck them on the barbie for 20 seconds before you're ready, and then they'll just soften up again and be perfect to fill for your kebab. So I reckon that's probably been on maybe 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. It really is that easy and that quick. And if you're going to flavour them up, remember you can put your garlic and your herbs into that basic dough as well, and then they're absolutely gorgeous and they're so easy. So I'm just going to put mine onto a plate when it's done. I hope everyone enjoyed their carrot scones last week. I set it as a task at school, as a whole school task, so even pupils that don't do food as a subject. And I've had so many emails this week with pictures of the scones that they've made and how they've even adapted the recipe slightly. It's been lovely, really, really good to see people getting into the spirit of baking. Okay, it's smelling really nice as well. Obviously the butter just adds richness to it. When you're frying naan breads, naan bread can be made in a similar way to this, or naan bread can be yeast based, but you would fry them in this way as well. You can also grill them, the same as you can grill the flatbreads. But I personally prefer the pan fried way. Right, so have a sniff. You can smell the vinegar and the honey and the garlic in there, which is great. So we're going to start threading the kebabs onto our skewers in a minute. If you're going to cook them straight away, have your grill tray by you so you can put them straight on. If you're not, then you can put them on a tray and just cover them for later. So I get my tray ready. And bring this over to show you. So nice and golden brown on the other side, so it's even, shouldn't be doughy at all. There shouldn't be any patches of dough that looks kind of raw and undercooked. If you feel like you need to flip it back over the other way because you're not quite happy there's enough colour on there, then by all means do that. But it's literally ready. So you can see how they puff up slightly, and that's the baking powder. And obviously we've added a little bit extra to what's already in there with our self-raising flour. This is our lunch today. So I'm looking forward to this one. Right, so get your bits in front of you, your peppers and chorizo if you're using it, or alternative if you're doing that. And then take your skewers. Don't forget, wooden ones, if you haven't soaked them, they will need soaking before you put your food onto them. Metal ones, you're good to go. Right, turn that off. One flatbread. Imagine now when we've cooked our kebab as well, we can lay the kebab in there and then fold that over. It's going to be beautiful. If you're feeling brave, try and roll them out even just a little bit thinner. I don't like mine too thin, I'm quite happy with it like that. And that is how easy flatbreads are to make. Yogurt, baking powder, flour. Mix it together, let it rest slightly, pan fry in a little bit of butter and oil. Right. Now we're going to be handling the raw chicken, so just make sure that you've got everything you need in one place, because you don't have to keep going back and washing your hands. So, skewer, any order you like. I tend to start with a bit of pepper. So, thread them on. Just be careful if you're a child and you're threading it onto one of the kebabs that have got a very pointed tip to it, particularly the metal ones. Just be careful. I tend to put the kebab onto the plate and then press down into the piece of pepper or the chorizo. Just leave a little bit of space in between, and then you could marinate the peppers and the chorizo as well. What I'm going to do is just brush a little bit of the marinade over again before they go onto the grill. So alternate, piece of chicken, pepper, chorizo, and just keep going. And obviously if you've got anything else to put on there, then you can do that too. Need chicken, I need next? Pepper. It's getting me thinking this morning. And then I'll finish it with another piece of chorizo and a piece of chicken. I always like to feel like I'm getting plenty on the kebab. Okay, it's important just to leave a little gap between the chicken and the chorizo and the pepper, just so that the heat can obviously circulate around and cook it evenly. So that is going to go onto my tray, and then I'll do the next one. Again, I'll start with chorizo this time. Pepper, chicken, and you'll see that there's still plenty of marinade left, so we'll just get a brush, or you can use a spoon and just spoon some over the top of the chorizo and the vegetables. Okay, keep going. I can't really make this bit interesting, sorry. I just looked out the window there and the sun's gone in now. I thought it was going to be a nice sunny day. Okay, done. That's going to go onto my tray again. I've got a couple of smaller skewers, so I will start off with pepper and then thread them with some chicken. Obviously you don't have to use chorizo, but that's paprika flavoured and nice and rich as well. Just helps to add moisture because obviously there is some fat in chorizo. And I'll add another piece of pepper and another piece of chicken, and then one more pepper. Now if you want to carry on at this point and cook your other flatbreads, then you can do. Just make sure your pan every time is nice and hot, and I would only cook one at a time, so roll one, cook one, and while one's cooking you can then be rolling out the next one. Put my last bits of chicken on that one, and I've still got a pepper left, so I'm going to pop that onto the end of my bigger kebab with my last bit of chicken. Okay, then with the marinade that you've got left over, because you will still have a little bit left in the bowl, you can get a pastry brush, or you can use a teaspoon and just literally just run the spoon with the marinade over. That's why I've got my foil on there as well, because you will have noticed the marinade drips down. And then I don't like to waste anything. Obviously this has had raw meat in it, so I'm not going to use it for anything else other than this dish. But what's on there, I can just coat my peppers and chorizo with. You could always use some diced sort of pancetta as well if you wanted to put that onto kebabs. There we go. And using the chorizo, because of the fat, it really works well with keeping these kebabs moist, because there's nothing worse than when we just have chicken on there, and particularly if they're barbecued, they can dry out and then, you know, they become quite tough and chewy. So having chorizo, or even just slices of pork fat, I know the Spanish do that, just have the thin slices of fat in between. It just helps to keep the kebabs nice and moist. So my grill's nice and hot, so I'm ready to start cooking these kebabs, and obviously we need to make sure that they're cooked all the way through, so we'd cook them for around 5 minutes on one side and then turn them over 5 minutes on the other side. Obviously you need to check to make sure that the chicken is cooked all the way through so it's not pink. It's harder to do when it's got a marinade on because it's changed colour, so if you have got a temperature probe, you could always test a piece of chicken, and it should be 75 degrees, so in the thickest point of the chicken you can probe it. That's always a good one to do. When we're at school and we're teaching, we would always get them to use a temperature probe to check that their meat is cooked. You know, does it look cooked? Yes, but we need to make sure that it is. So sometimes just guessing isn't quite enough, particularly if you're cooking for a larger group of people. Right, I'm going to go and wash my hands again. A lot of hand washing with this task, and I will be back. Right, I'm going to put my chicken kebabs just over here for a moment. I'm going to move my chicken bits out the way. And just clean down. We have to be so careful when we're working with raw meat because of the risk of cross-contamination. So when bacteria gets passed on to something else. Right, I'm going to cook my kebabs and I will be back in around 10 minutes and we'll put the flatbread and the kebabs together. If you wanted any sauce to drizzle over the top, you could always use a little bit more natural yogurt and just put a little bit onto the flatbread before you laid your kebab on there. If you've got any leaves, mixed leaves, spinach leaves, they could go into the flatbread as well. So I'll come back, I'll do a finished dish so you can see what it's like. And if anyone's asked any questions as we've been going this morning, then I can just have a quick look through those as well, because I don't see them coming up on my phone that is propped up by a tin of baked beans at the minute. So I'll go through and have a check. If you've got any questions, fire away and I'll ping back my answers. If you're doing all the flatbreads now, remember one at a time. If not, make sure that dough is kept covered so it doesn't dry out too much. Okay, I'll be back soon. Thank you.